Hello everyone! Today on the Artis with Ivy Reiss, we have journalist David Silverberg, and we'll be venturing to the edge. We're going to be talking about his upcoming collection, As Close to the Edge Without Going Over. He has been published in over 40 publications, including Now Magazine, The Washington Post, Toronto Star, Canadian Jewish News, The Globe, BBC, and BuzzFeed, just to name a few. We'll also be touching on his one-man show, Jewnique, which toured in 2018, is currently going into its second run for 2019, and also about the sci-fi and spec poetry genre, which is making a huge rise in Toronto. And I'd like to mention that as the founder of the Toronto Poetry Slam, I don't think the scene today here in Toronto would be the same without David Silverberg. Hi, David. How are you?
Hey, Ivy. Really good. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. So 14 years ago, I mean, your resume is unbelievable. But 14 years ago, you founded the Toronto Poetry Slam at the Drake, and you're still co-hosting it today. Is it fair to say the scene wouldn't be what it is today, maybe, without that injunction?
I'm a humble guy, so I like to think that, you know, it's bigger than maybe just TPS. But I definitely think we've made an impact in the GTA and in Ontario based on how many shows we've done over 14 years, how many people we've reached with, you know, sometimes upwards of 220 people coming to the Drake Underground to see poetry on a Saturday night, which always blows me away, even 14 years later. And of course, we try to do partnerships with places like the Toronto Festival of Authors, the Jazz Festival, Toronto Public Library, and the Luminato Festival. So we also try to branch out beyond our home venue to bring spoken word to places that maybe don't normally have spoken word, like the Jazz Festival, something that we did last year. And
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's wild to do things with other artists, you know, that I've always long respected and long, you know, admired throughout my time as an arts consumer. And the poetry scene has definitely built a lot of great talent in the city. I've seen that. People started off maybe January being a bit tentative and shy on the open mic, and then come September, they're confident, they're writing new poems, they're making friends at the Drake Underground, and building a community that I think is very unique in Toronto because it's still underground and niche, the spoken word thing, and not just underground because we're in the Drake Underground, but because it hasn't, you know, we're not on the cover of the Globe and Mail, we're not going to be on, you know, BBC News or anything like that. It's still an I think, appreciated art form, even though it is getting more popular. And that's, I think, why, you know, a lot of people still like it.
It's huge. And you do when you have the competitions, you do cross-country tours, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that exposure really gets the eye on Toronto.
And what's kind of cool is that we have a team that comes out of our season every year that is 5 poets that then go compete at various international and national tournaments. So we kind of almost have like a bit of a sports, you know, analogy there because we have a coach, we have a team manager, which is usually me, and sometimes we, you know, love to see that sports comparison because, you know, they are training to compete and to be better poets than they were yesterday. And, you know, that's what athletes do too.
That's what I think is really cool about you is that not only are you a writer, journalist, you founded and still run the TO Poetry Slam, you also work with youth as an educator, and I think that comes across even at the Drake.
Thanks, and I love doing that. Honestly, I love working with kids who might have only thought that poetry is from what their teachers taught them, which is usually just dead white people. Not to, you know, slam people like Shakespeare and T.S. Eliot who have great groundings of poetry for kids to learn from, but you know, a Persian kid in North York can't relate to Shakespeare. You know, a young Korean kid in the East End might not be able to relate to T.S. Eliot. So that's why I try to bring poetry and bring in poets to classrooms that reflect the demographic of Toronto and reflect also the concerns of Torontonians or Ontarians if that is something that I want to stress.
Absolutely. Well, you've definitely got your finger on the button, and I think we'll come back to that with the sci-fi and spec genre poetry, which is what your collection touches on. But like people know about Jewnique, so it launched May 2018. It toured across Canada. It's a one-man show, 60 minutes. You wrote it, you star in it. And tell us a little bit about it, and then we're going to play a clip for people to see.
Sure. So Jewnique is my long-awaited poem upon poems upon poems, a solo show about my relationship to Judaism. Something that I really haven't written about before or really talked about even publicly too much because I was still sorting it out, how I related to a culture that I turned my back on for so many years in terms of not being religious, not following every single rule, not being kosher since I was 16. And I felt that guilt of it, as many Jews do.
I think that can resonate across religions even.
Oh, yeah. Definitely, like, yeah, a lot of people have turned their back on, their faith or what their family has always been doing their entire lives, and might have felt that shame and guilt too. And I decided to write about how many other people in the Jewish culture can embrace Judaism beyond being religious and following every edict. And so I profiled in the solo show, Jewnique, various Jewish trailblazers and gurus, people who have been maybe working in the klezmer music scene for a while. I talked to a Holocaust survivor to learn about Holocaust education and why that was important to him. And I even profiled my brother in the poem, who is a religious leader in a synagogue, and how he found music to be his way to embrace Judaism.
That's cool. That is in one of the clips I saw, and I wasn't sure if it was fictional or not. So
definitely true to life.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And it's going to play in 1 second. I just want to let the viewers know what I love about it is the layers of both humor and seriousness and within there. So we'll talk a bit more on that in a second, and let's watch these 2 clips.
Sure.
See, that's the song. That's the song I always looked forward to at shul because it meant I was 5 minutes away from the kiddush, the reception on Saturday service. Adon is one of the final songs. It's the final song during a Saturday service. And yeah, I wanted that marble cake. I wanted that poppy seed cookie. That orange crush my parents never bought. Maybe a shot of whiskey if they weren't looking. My brother, though, he looked forward to the beginning of the service because he loved the musicality of it all, the melodies, the tunes, the harmonizing. So it's like we were 2 bookends where Ben loved the beginning of a service and I just wanted it to end so I can eat a nice nosh.
Love the people, that's all. There is no bad Americans, there is no bad Canadians, there is no bad Germans, there is no bad Jews. There is good Germans, good Americans, bad Americans, good Canadians, bad Canadians, good Jews, bad Jews. Don't put up of people, stamp, they are bad.
As a journalist, when I write a profile, I often have a choice. Write it from the first person or the third person. Third person, something you commonly read in magazines and newspapers, it's the omniscient narrative. Or I can dive under the skin of the interviewee and tell it from his perspective. And sharing with you Moshe Krause's story, it has to come from his throat, with details so precise you can feel the mud underneath your feet. For Moshe Krause, when people say music saved their life, they mean it's uplifted them when they've spiraled down a grimy path. But for me, music truly saved my life. Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, 1944. The air clogged with sweat and dirt. Rotten bread dusted with gravel, sometimes human feces. The Nazi guards laughing at us while we ate. During one Sunday, during the appel, the roll call, a Nazi guard stopped me, called my number, and said, "You, go see Joseph Kramer, the commandant." This beast of Belsen was known to thunder his vicious anger down on Jews. Machine guns, dogs, fire pits. Bergen-Belsen was his sandbox of mayhem. And I stood there, still, waiting, watching as he drank his wine and feasted on a sandwich. "Do you sing in German?" he asked me. And he must have known that I, a chazan in Budapest, an international performer, had recently sung for camp prisoners. "Yes, I do," I replied. And he asked me to sing a song by Joseph Schmidt, the popular German tenor. I had no choice.
That was amazing. What I really like about Jewnique is it shows how you can address serious topics with humor as well. Mm-hmm. And it's really got a lot of layers in there. And one of the quotes, actually, that from the second clip we just saw, that comes just a few minutes after, says, you say, "We are poor artists if we paint everyone with the same brush. We believe we live in a world that is black and white. The opposite of love isn't hate, is indifference."
Mm-hmm. That was an important poem for me to do about Moshe Kraus, a Holocaust survivor in Ottawa, who survived the Holocaust because the German commander loved his singing so much, he forced him to sing for him every Sunday for weeks, if not months. So if he wasn't a great singer, he would have died in the Holocaust with the rest of his family. So that was an important story for me to commemorate and to share, because not a lot of people, I think, know about Holocaust survivors, especially those who may be under 30 and may not be getting the education in Ontario schools that I think I might have gotten in my public school or my Hebrew school. And his story just was remarkable, and his autobiography really moved me. And I really like that he told me that line of how, you know, there are good Germans and there are bad Germans.
Yeah.
There are great Canadians, there are terrible Canadians, and we are poor artists if we paint everyone with the same brush. Otherwise, we live in a world that is black and white, where it really can be much more technicolorful. And that stood out to me because it's so true. We think of one culture as, of course, having some bad history with it, like Germany, but you know, today's Germans shouldn't have to be castigated for the sins of their ancestors.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, and that goes for any culture, because that just propagates. It propagates hatred and bitterness and resentment, and then that leads to more wars.
Yeah, and if anyone knows about, you know, being persecuted, it's the Jewish people who for years have always been nomadic too, and have gone from place to place until they found Israel as their home. But of course, you know, there's a rise of anti-Semitism in Canada in the past couple years, unfortunately. And that has, you know, still been on my mind as I do these kind of poems, to ensure that that kind of hate doesn't propagate too widely.
Yeah, it's, again, you've just got this knack for having your finger on the button, and you really do the play, like, just in the various artistic ways you show inclusivity in an accessible manner, and then you also poke fun at, I mean, I gotta say, you poke fun at Jewish cultures, which, you know, every culture you can make, you know, little jokes. And
that's critical. Yeah.
I thought the one thing that was hilarious was the Star of David over the apple
symbol. right, exactly, yeah. Which is actually tough to find, a Star of David sticker. I had to get someone to make a custom one of me, for me for some reason.
You could be starting a new trend, though.
Maybe there'll be a whole bunch of laptops with Star of David instead of apples. But what it was really important to me, something that you mentioned, was adding humor. And I think that's been part of my MO as a poet and as a journalist too, is, you maybe talk about something serious for 6-7 minutes, but, you know, then lighten the mood with something a bit more humorous, like my poem about my brother, or the last poem in Jewnique about Alison Pick, where I try to bring in flashes of humor, not where it's like slapstick funny or pun funny, but, you know, observational humor has always been something I've long admired, such as, you know, like Seinfeld has been an influence on me, and
I love Seinfeld.
And Larry David, yeah, for sure. Those two artists have really, you know, cemented in me how you can be a really great writer and a really great observer of human nature, but not have to be, you know, hitting people with one-liner jokes. It could be more of a longer kind of joke or comedic moment. Yeah,
we put them in that situation.
Yeah.
I know I've seen you do live poetry, and it's been absolutely hilarious.
Oh, thank you.
And so we should I want to tell the viewers, so you are booking right now for 2019 with Jewnique, and they can contact you on your website.
For sure.
And we're going to give all of David's websites, davidsilverberg.ca, and we'll give you all the info at the end of the show on the screen. And when did the 2019 shows start?
To be determined. I'm in talks right now with some cities such as Peterborough and Montreal and maybe West Coast Vancouver, to try to bring it to the West Coast, like Vancouver and Victoria, which do have great populations of Jews there. So I'm thinking about bringing it to communities in Canada that have a decent Jewish population. And also, probably more for 2020, looking to go to New York and some cities there.
Very cool. Amazing, yeah. And you were in Montreal and a number of cities for the 2018.
In 2018, I was in Ottawa, Calgary, and Collingwood. Awesome. Yeah, I've yet to go to Montreal. That's also on the bucket list too.
Yeah. Well, so in regard to the humor aspect, which you do in Jewnique, and but right now, so your collection, which is launching May 8th. I absolutely love the title. As Close to the Edge Without Going Over. It's launching May 8th at Handlebar in Kensington Market. And this is mostly sci-fi and spec poetry.
Yeah, exactly.
And can you tell, like, even, and you've told me it's on the rise, and I was like, really? And you're like, yeah, no one's talking about it. So I was like, let's talk about it.
Sure.
So what is Tell me about it.
I see sci-fi poetry as like the cousin of science fiction novels and short stories, which have been around for millennia, right?
Yeah.
It's been around for centuries, of course. A lot of people writing about what the future may look like. And in poetry, you have maybe less room to expand upon great ideas relating to science and maybe robotics or space. But I think a great poet will be able to edit themselves down to a poem that can, have that storytelling and have that narrative of what the maybe utopic future might look like, what a dystopic future might look like. And my publisher, Sandra Kasturi from ChiZine, and this is the imprint KQP that published this, really wanted me to push myself as a writer to write about science fiction, fantasy, horror, things I've always loved to read and consumed like a fiend, because I love horror movies. I've long loved fantasy books. I was a big, huge fan of Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, and of course C.S. Lewis and Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as a kid. But I never really got a chance to write poetry, serious poetry, on those topics or on those themes. So this was a great challenge to finally write about things that might have been on my mind, like the role of social media in the future and technology, space exploration, some things I touch upon there, what's going to happen to reading books, in the future too. I have a poem to my niece, who's 2 years old, Emily, and what's her life going to be like when she's only lived with the internet and never known a really kind of analog life. Wow. So I tried to explore different ways to talk about the future in a way that's hopefully not cliche. It's not talking about like robotics or like hardware kind of stuff. I'm talking more about what will the future look like if perhaps things stay the course, or things maybe shift to a poor end, or perhaps to a more blissful end.
Yeah, that's why I have a feeling this collection is definitely going to hit the button, because just like 1984 and so many books before it, they've predicted what is happening now. And if you're already talking about what's going to happen to people who never grew up in an analog world, who knows? And people might be talking about this book in 15, 20 years.
I hope so. I hope it stands the test of time. And I have to give a shout out to obviously some of the poets who do dabble in sci-fi, such as Derek Brown in LA, David Klink in Toronto, Missy Peters in Victoria, who really inspired me to look at poetry in a new way once I heard their poems that also touch on sci-fi and fantastical and sometimes horror themes that, gave me a few thoughts of like, hey, maybe I could do a full-length poetry like this too, because this is really my first book of poetry with an ISBN number that makes it all legit. So I really wanted to make sure I did a good job with this and explored all the different avenues I could as a fan of spec fiction and spec poetry.
Awesome. And I just wanted to, when you mentioned the shout out, I know you wanted to give a shout out to Charlie Petch for the lighting.
Yeah, Charlie Petch, my buddy for Jewnique. He did a great job in bringing lighting and sound tech to Jewnique. And of course, my creative consultant, Autumn Smith, was instrumental too in making it happen. So it really is a team effort when you do a solo show. The word solo is a little misnomer. It's just me on stage, just me writing it, sure. But there's a lot of other people who help make a solo show what it is. Yeah, so I got to give a lot of love to those folks.
Amazing. And so let's touch on journalism, and then David's going to do a couple pieces for us from his collection. So you've written from everything from startup culture in Toronto, food reviews, culinary reviews, cannabis. What would you say to, and you're an educator, what would you say to up-and-coming journalists? Or how has the journey been? Well,
first, the journey has been amazing. I got into journalism because I wanted Monday to not be like Tuesday.
Yeah.
And in journalism, every day is different. One day you're talking to a neurosurgeon about concussions. The next day you're talking to Terry Gilliam from Monty Python. And then the third day you're talking to an artist who beatboxes for a living. And I just love the variety of journalism. I was not someone to do, assembly line work or retail work, the same thing every day. Just not my bag. Great for other people to do that. Maybe they like routine. I was not a huge fan of routine. So journalism, especially freelance journalism, allowed me to write on many different things. And yeah, you touched upon it. I love writing about startup culture. I love learning about why entrepreneurs get into certain aspects of their life. I love writing about cannabis because it's never before has Canada just suddenly legalized a whole new industry right from jump. Not since, we got rid of prohibition with alcohol. And I just like learning about why people do what they do. And journalism lets you have access to experts that not everyone can talk to on the regular.
Absolutely. It lets you see the world through other people's eyes, which I think is one of the reasons why Jewnique is able to address things from so many different angles, and why poetry, which we're going to see. Poetry as a genre, though, I think also does that.
Right.
It's one of the hardest things to write.
And also to touch upon your last question of what advice I would give to up-and-coming journalists, I would say write as much as you can, even if it's for your own blog and something that maybe will never see the light of day. I think a lot of journalists want to get published without doing the hard work of putting your bum in the seat and doing the hard work of writing and researching. So I started a blog maybe 3 years ago on my website. I wish I started it when I was younger, but I wasn't really into blogging. And blogging wasn't really a thing too much when I was at Ryerson. But I think it's a great way to practice the craft, to get used to writing maybe things that you're passionate about, and also to always be writing. Because as a journalist, especially freelance, you don't get every pitch accepted. You get a lot of rejection in freelance life. So that can sometimes weigh on you, especially if you have a bit of a thin skin. So the more you write and the more you feel accomplished hitting that word publish on the keyboard and maybe getting the word out through social media, then that kind of feedback loop can really, bring confidence.
Can be a beautiful thing, yeah. Even just hitting LinkedIn's great too for publishing articles.
Oh yeah, great if you want to write about things that a lot of employees are learning about. I love writing for LinkedIn and also medium.com as well.
Awesome. Well, Dave, such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Ivy.
We're going to put your contact info on the screen. And while that's on the screen, everyone, you can contact David Silverberg at davidsilverberg.ca and to book him for speaking events, educating, check out his website, and also his upcoming show, Jewnique, that tours again. Now, you're launched May 8 at Handlebar. What time is it? How should people get in touch? Should they just show up?
Just show up. It's at 7:30 p.m. It's free. It's an accessible venue, and it's on Augusta Street in Kensington Market. I don't have the exact address on top of my head. There's some other fantastic authors launching stuff there, like Troy Harkin, who also is part of the ChiZine family, and it's going to be a really fun night.
Awesome. And people will be able to get autographed copies of your book there, read live, meet you, and you can also order books. They're already available on Amazon.
Yeah, exactly.
Advanced copies. And thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, stay with us. This was David Silverberg, and we're going to be back in just a few seconds. He's going to do 2 pieces from his upcoming collection, As Close to the Edge Without Going Over. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back in just a few seconds. And thank you, David.
Oh, thank you.
The ghosts that love me. They drift at will, floating in and out of my walls, quick to vanish when I stare too long. I'm not sure when my dead friend started swaying over my shoulder, but the dust swirled the first time when Zach hovers above my bed, a joint winking on his lips. I almost crackle with laughter. I almost reach out for a clap hug, then he passes me the joint and my hand passes through his. Marcia catches me in a snowstorm, lobs transparent snowballs at my back. All the while she dances. God, she could move as smooth as seaweed in lakes. She also cries, still shimmying to no music. And I'm reminded of how depression flicked its embers on her hair, lighting a fire she never wanted. I dance with her, but I don't cry. She always loved my smile. Wax and wane, the moon lanterns my walk home from the Jays game. Hovering above me, Marley is frowning, track marks dotting her neck. I want to ask her if she's okay now, but such a cliche question ferments in my gut. I just want her close. I'm tempted to call Jason, let him know his sister is here, a mile away from where they grew up. As the moon languishes behind brewing clouds, Marley meanders into a park, looking back at me. I don't follow her. The next poem I'm going to read is my attempt at bringing a bit of horror into this collection of spec poetry. So let's see how this goes. It's called They Come for Our Words. The demons have come, but we didn't think they'd come for our tongues first. Not the flappy crepe waggling between our lips. They've come for our language. Somehow, some why, some of us can't say the words thundering in our throats. They become a puddle, a scab wound, a teenager fumbling for a bra clasp. And so we can't organize like we normally could have. The demons, they know how to separate the strong from the meek. Some of us have become appetizers for their sword-sized fangs. I'm hoping to spoil their dinner. See, I'm writing all this down before they can steal my written words. I hear it's been happening all over the world. My tongue they have, and they forked it like their own gruesome gods, but I know how they do what they brew, because I heard their mud voices on the way to get rations. They can be real sloppy when they're feeding on our children. They didn't notice my ears pressed against those blood-drenched doors. And they don't nizzle-slog how we info-crampled that meeting with their hushed tones, built into a fever pitch of mad wimpledander. Oh no, it's happening, isn't it? Okay, let me spew this out like it's a black licorice Slurpee. They start with our lang fandango and jimble down to our ears, an infection that shrimpsies into every way we have to communicate. We soon go deaf. It's a slow burful, and it's making us go mad, which is exactly what those cantipoles want. Oh God, it's getting worse, isn't it? My hands aren't crisping what I want to orqua. My eyes are feeling drevy with Yerger, and every time I want to Olbert to you what I need to asperf, it all comes out psycho-afro-disco-beta bio-aquadulu. These demons are planning to stromponi the entire luminaria. Fleas, hurkle me. My name is Cruddlemas Casket Slape, and I live at Tanderdream Examper in St. Krusky, and, oh, it's too late, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you once again, everyone. That was David Silverberg reading from his brand new collection, As Close to the Edge Without Going Over. Join him May 8th at the Handlebar on Augusta Avenue in Kensington Market for the launch at 7:30 p.m. and visit davidsilverberg.ca to find out more, and follow him on Twitter at SilverbergDave. Thank you, David, for joining us on the Artis.
Thanks, Ivy. You got a good thing going here.
Thank you. And we'll be back in a few moments with our next guest.